The rescue. The sky above the alien planet burned red. Smoke rose from the battlefield, covering the land in a thick, choking fog. The ground was littered with broken weapons, shattered machines, and the remains of a fight that had ended only hours ago. Commander James Carter stood at the edge of his ship, scanning the area with cautious eyes. He had seen many wars. He had walked through many ruins. But this place felt different. The silence was heavy. Too heavy. James tightened his grip on his plasma rifle. His ship, the Starbound, was parked behind him, its engines humming softly. His AI assistant, HFY, spoke through his earpiece. No life signs detected within 100 meters. James took a deep breath and stepped forward. The air smelled of burnt metal and something else. Something old, something strange. Then he saw her. A figure lay in the dust, half covered by the rubble of a fallen structure. Her skin glowed faintly, pulsing with a soft golden light. Long silver hair spread around her like a halo. She was wearing armor, but it was cracked, damaged, evidence of a recent battle. She looked human. Almost. James hesitated. He had seen many alien species before, but this one was different. Her face was smooth, delicate, and completely still. Her chest rose and fell slowly, as if she was in a deep sleep. "Ishicho, scan her," he whispered. A soft beep followed, then the AI's voice returned. Weak but stable vitals. Oxygen-based life form. No major injuries detected. No injuries. Then why was she unconscious? James looked around. The battlefield was quiet, but something about it felt wrong. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He kneeled beside the woman. His fingers brushed against her armor. It was warm, warmer than it should be. Her golden glow pulsed slightly at his touch. Then her eyes snapped open. James jumped back, raising his weapon. Her gaze locked onto his. Her eyes were not human. They shimmered like molten gold, swirling with an unnatural light. She tried to sit up but gasped in pain. Her hand gripped his wrist before he could pull away. "You?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Her language was unfamiliar, but the way she said it, it sounded like recognition. James frowned. "You need help." She blinked, as if trying to understand his words. Then, to his surprise, she nodded weakly. That was all the confirmation he needed. With one swift motion, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than expected. As he turned back to his ship, he felt something shift in the air. A low growl echoed through the ruins. James froze. Slowly, he turned his head. Shapes moved in the fog. Tall, slender figures with glowing red eyes. The creatures were watching him, their long, clawed hands twitching in the dim light. Predators. Hunters. James cursed under his breath. He had spent too much time here. He needed to leave. Now. The creatures did not attack. They did not chase him. They only stood there, unmoving, their eyes fixed on him and the woman in his arms. Then, to his shock, they knelt. Every single one of them dropped to one knee, lowering their heads in silent reverence. James' heart pounded. What the hell was going on? He didn't have time to figure it out. He ran back to the Starbound, carrying the woman inside and sealing the hatch behind him. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting them off the ground. Through the viewport, he saw the creatures below. They didn't move. They only watched as his ship disappeared into the sky. James exhaled, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He glanced at the woman lying in the medical bay. Her golden glow was fading, but her breathing was steady. Isiko's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Commander, new data detected. Translation of alien speech in progress." James ran a hand through his hair. "Tell me what she said." A moment of silence. Then, ECJO's robotic voice spoke again. Her words were, "Husband." James' blood ran cold. The awakening. The Starbound cruised silently through the vast darkness of space, leaving the ruined battlefield far behind. Commander James Carter sat in his chair, his mind tangled in confusion. The woman lay unconscious in the medical bay, her faint golden glow pulsing softly, as if she were recharging. James replayed the moment in his head. The eerie silence, the creatures kneeling instead of attacking, and then her final word before passing out. Husband. The word echoed in his mind like a ghostly whisper. It made no sense. James had encountered many alien species, but this was something different. Something ancient. Something important. Isiko's robotic voice interrupted his thoughts. Commander, subject's vitals are stabilizing. Neural activity is increasing. She is waking up. James straightened. He grabbed his plasma pistol, just in case, and approached the medical bay. The room was dimly lit. The woman lay on the examination table, her silver hair fanned out beneath her. Her glowing skin had dimmed, but she still looked otherworldly. Then suddenly, she inhaled sharply. Her golden eyes snapped open. James took a step back. For a moment, she stared at the ceiling, as if confused about where she was. Then, her gaze shifted to him. Her expression remained unreadable, but there was something intense in her eyes, something that sent a chill down his spine. She sat up slowly, ignoring the medical restraints ECHO had placed on her. James raised a hand. Take it easy. You're safe. She tilted her head slightly. Then, before he could react, she moved. Fast. Too fast. In an instant, she was off the table, standing right in front of him. Her golden eyes locked onto his, unblinking, unrelenting. James tightened his grip on his weapon, but something in her gaze stopped him. She wasn't hostile. She was studying him. Her lips parted, and she whispered something in her own language. ECHO processed the words and translated. It is true. James frowned. What's true? She lifted a hand and touched his chest, right over his heart. A warmth spread through his body, like an unseen force flowing between them. His vision blurred for a moment, and suddenly, images flashed through his mind. A temple of glowing stone. A gathering of her people, all bowing. A sacred ritual, ancient and unbroken. A man standing beside her, holding her hand. James jerked away, heart pounding. What the hell was that? She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back, bowing her head. Isiko's voice broke the silence. Commander, new data has been decrypted. The markings on her armor belong to the House of Vayana, a lost civilization known only through fragmented records. The language she speaks is a dialect of the old empire. James exhaled. And what does that mean? ECHO hesitated. Then, in a tone colder than usual, it replied. Commander, based on available data, it appears you have unknowingly completed an ancient bonding ritual. In her culture, saving her life in that specific manner is equivalent to a marriage ceremony. James froze. You're kidding. I do not joke. He turned to the woman, who was still watching him, her face calm. You think we're married? He asked, disbelief heavy in his voice. She did not hesitate. She simply nodded. James ran a hand down his face. Oh, come on. This was insane. He had rescued her. That was all. How could that translate into marriage? Before he could process this madness, the ship's lights flickered. The air in the room became heavier, charged with unseen energy. Then, a strange symbol glowed on the woman's hand. ECHO immediately spoke up. Warning. An energy link has been established between you and the subject. It is synchronizing. James' stomach dropped. Synchronizing. What does that mean? ECHO's voice carried an unusual hesitation. Unknown. The process is ancient and not fully understood. However, based on energy readings, it appears to be a life bond. A what? Your life and hers are now linked. James stared at the woman. Her expression remained calm, as if she had expected this. But for him, reality was crashing down like a meteor storm. He wasn't just stuck with an alien. He was bonded to her, possibly forever. And worse, he had no idea what that truly meant. The bonding ritual. The hum of the Starbound's engines was the only sound in the dimly lit control room. James Carter sat at the edge of the console, fingers drumming against the surface, his mind racing. Across from him, the alien woman sat calmly, her glowing golden eyes unblinking as she watched him. She showed no fear, no confusion, only quiet acceptance. "So let me get this straight," James said, exhaling deeply. "I saved you, and now, according to your people's traditions, I'm married to you." She nodded once. James rubbed his temples. "That's ridiculous." She frowned slightly but said nothing. Isiko's robotic voice interrupted. "Commander, the ritual is more complex than a simple marriage. The data I have uncovered suggests that this bond is sacred among her people. It is not just symbolic, it is physical, mental, and possibly even spiritual. The energy link between you two is still stabilizing." James groaned. "Great. And what happens if I break this bond?" ECHO hesitated for a moment. Then, in a cold, mechanical tone, it said, "Possible outcomes include severe neurological damage, cellular disintegration, or death." James froze. "Death?" ECHO confirmed. "Yes, for both of you." James' heart pounded. This just keeps getting better. He turned back to the woman. "You knew this, didn't you?" She remained silent for a moment, then finally spoke, her voice smooth, almost melodic. "It is the way of my people." Her English was broken, but understandable. It was the first time he had heard her speak in his language. James narrowed his eyes. "And what exactly does that mean?" She lifted a hand and placed it over her chest, a gesture that seemed both personal and ceremonial. "My name is Elara." James stared at her. The name carried weight, as if it belonged to someone important. "Okay, Elara," he said, still trying to wrap his head around this. "What do your people expect from me? Am I supposed to?" He stopped himself before finishing that sentence. He was not ready to hear the answer. Elara tilted her head slightly. "You are my chosen." James sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." Before he could continue, the ship's systems flickered and an alarm blared through the cabin. Isiko's voice immediately followed. "Commander, incoming transmission detected. Unidentified vessel approaching." James jumped to his feet. "What kind of vessel?" "Class unknown. Energy signature matches that of Elara's species." James turned to her. "Friends of yours?" Elara's expression darkened. "No." That was all James needed to hear. He rushed to the controls and pulled up the external cameras. Outside, a massive black ship was emerging from the shadows of space. Its design was unlike anything James had ever seen, sleek, curved, and pulsating with a dark energy that made his stomach twist. Then, the transmission came through. A deep, rumbling voice spoke in an ancient dialect, but ECHO quickly translated. "Return the bonded one. You are unworthy." James grimaced. "Oh, great. More people who think I shouldn't be here." Elara's hands clenched into fists. "They are the Shadowborn." James glanced at her. "That doesn't sound good." "It is not." ECHO cut in again. "Commander, the Shadowborn vessel is charging weapons." James cursed. "Of course they are." His fingers flew across the control panel, activating the Starbound's defensive shields. He had no idea what these people wanted, but they clearly weren't here for tea. Elara took a deep breath and stepped forward, her golden eyes glowing brighter. "They want the bond broken." James turned to her sharply. "What?" "They believe you are not worthy to complete the ritual. They will destroy you and claim me for their own." James' blood ran cold. "Destroy me?" "Yeah, I'm not a fan of that plan." The Shadowborn ship fired. A massive energy blast hurtled toward them, shaking the entire cabin. The starbound shields absorbed most of the impact, but the power surge sent sparks flying through the control panels. Shields at 65%, ECHO reported. Sustained fire will disable us within minutes. James gritted his teeth. We need a way out of this. Alara stepped forward, placing a glowing hand on the console. Symbols lit up across the screen, ancient and unreadable to James. There is only one way, she said softly. James didn't like her tone. And that is. She turned to him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before, determination. Complete the bond. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Wait. Hold on. James took a step back. You mean actually? Yes. James blinked. Right now. In the middle of a space battle. Alara nodded. If the bond is completed, they will have no claim over me. No claim over you. They will be forced to retreat. James stared at her, heart racing. Married. To an alien. And it wasn't just a title. It was something far deeper. Something that would bind them together permanently. The ship shook again as another blast hit the shields. Shields at 40%, ECHO warned. James clenched his jaw. He hated this. He hated not having control over the situation. But he also knew one thing for sure. If he didn't do this, he was dead. Alara extended her hand, golden energy swirling around her fingertips. Choose. James exhaled sharply. Damn it. He reached out and took her hand. In an instant, light exploded around them, and his vision blurred as the ritual began. And deep in the shadows of space, the Shadowborn watched and prepared. The connection. Darkness. For a moment, James Carter felt like he was floating in a void, weightless and untethered. His body was gone. His mind stretched across a vast and endless space. He had experienced many strange things in his time as an explorer, but nothing had ever felt like this. Alara's hand was still in his, but it wasn't just touch anymore. It was something deeper, a pull, a merging, an unexplainable force weaving them together like threads in a tapestry. Then suddenly, the visions began. Memories not his own. Images flooded his mind. A planet of gold and silver, its cities shining under twin suns. A throne of obsidian, surrounded by figures cloaked in starlight. A war, endless and merciless, with the Shadowborn at its center. And then, Alara's past. She was not just an ordinary soldier. She was royalty. The last heir of the House of Vayana, a bloodline older than human civilization itself. Her people were once rulers of the Celestial Empire, but the Shadowborn came from the abyss, consuming everything in their path. The war had raged for centuries until the Empire collapsed, leaving only scattered survivors. The bonding ritual, the one James had unknowingly initiated, was once sacred to her people. It wasn't just marriage. It was a joining of souls, a sharing of power and fate. James gasped as he was yanked back into reality. The awakening. His body jerked violently as he crashed onto the Starbound's floor. His lungs burned as he sucked in air, feeling as if he had been drowning in an ocean of time. Alara knelt beside him, her golden eyes glowing like twin stars. It is done. James struggled to sit up, his head pounding. Everything felt different. The ship's hum sounded clearer. The air smelled sharper. Even his own heartbeat felt heavier, like there was something more inside him now. What the hell did we just do? He muttered. Alara studied him carefully. You are now bound to me. Our life forces are linked. What I feel, you will feel. What I know, you will know. James clenched his fists, his palms tingling. That's just fantastic. ECHO's voice suddenly cut in. Commander, I am detecting abnormal fluctuations in your neural patterns. Your biosignature has shifted. Your genetic structure is now partially aligned with that of subject Alara. James' eyes widened. Wait, what? Alara reached out and placed a hand on his chest. Immediately, warmth spread through his body, calming his rapid heartbeat. "Do not fight it," she said. "The bond is a gift, not a curse." James let out a bitter chuckle. "Yeah, feels more like a bad deal I never agreed to." Alara's gaze softened. "Would you rather be dead?" James sighed. Point taken. But before he could say more, the ship lurched violently. HFY blared an alarm. "Warning! Shadowborn vessel approaching fast. They are not retreating. They are preparing to board." James cursed under his breath. "I thought they'd leave us alone once we completed the ritual." Alara's expression turned grim. "They are afraid now." James narrowed his eyes. "Afraid? Of what?" Alara's golden glow pulsed stronger. "Of you. The transformation." Before James could react, the ship's emergency lights turned red, and the sound of metal being torn apart echoed through the corridors. They were breaching the hull. James grabbed his weapon, instincts taking over. "ECJO, prepare ship defenses. Alara, do you have any weapons?" But Alara didn't answer. She simply closed her eyes and took a deep breath. And then, James felt it. Something inside him shifted. A new energy, a raw power unlike anything he had ever felt before. It crackled beneath his skin, whispering to him like a hidden force waiting to be unleashed. His vision flickered for a moment, and then he saw through Alara's eyes. He saw the Shadowborn moving through the corridors, their elongated bodies twisting unnaturally as they prowled toward them. Their bodies weren't fully solid. They flickered like shadows, shifting between dimensions. And worst of all, they hungered for him. Not just for Alara, not just for the ship, for him. Because now, he wasn't just a human anymore. Now, he carried the bloodline of the lost celestial empire. He was one of them. And the Shadowborn would not stop until he was erased. The battle begins. The doors to the control room burst open. James barely had time to react before a Shadowborn lunged at him. It moved like a blur, faster than any living creature should be able to move. Its claws lashed out, aiming for his throat. But before it could strike, James moved. His body reacted on its own, faster than he had ever moved in his life. His reflexes were sharper, his instincts heightened. He dodged the attack, twisting his body at an impossible speed. His plasma pistol fired twice, but the Shadowborn merely flickered, its form dissolving for a moment before solidifying again. James gritted his teeth. "Oh, that's just not fair." Alara stepped forward, her hands glowing bright. "Use the bond." James turned to her. "What?" Alara's voice was firm. "You are no longer just human. The bond has given you more than you realize. Focus. Feel the energy inside you." James clenched his fists. He didn't have time to question it. He closed his eyes and focused. And then, he felt it. The same golden energy that pulsed through Alara's body was now inside him. It burned beneath his skin, surging through his veins. The Shadowborn lunged again. This time, James didn't dodge. He raised his hand, and the moment the creature touched him, a blast of golden energy erupted from his palm, tearing through its body like a supernova. The Shadowborn screamed, a high-pitched, inhuman shriek, before disintegrating into nothingness. James stared at his own hand, eyes wide. Holy! But before he could process it, more Shadowborn poured into the room. Alara stepped beside him, her own power glowing stronger. She turned to him with a small, knowing smile. "Now you fight as one of us." James took a deep breath, gripping his weapon, his newly awakened power crackling at his fingertips. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a war. And for the first time in his life, he was ready for it. The hunt begins. The Starbound shook violently as another explosion rocked the hull. Warning sirens blared through the corridors, red emergency lights flickering wildly. The Shadowborn were relentless, their twisted forms flickering between dimensions as they clawed their way deeper into the ship. James Carter was done running. His body still buzzed with the strange energy from the bond. his senses sharper than ever before. The knowledge of Alara's people, her combat instincts, her power, flowed through him like a second mind. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. A shadowborn lunged at him, its elongated, clawed fingers reaching for his throat. James didn't hesitate. His hand glowed with golden energy, and with a single strike, he sent a pulse of raw force straight into the creature's chest. The shadowborn screeched as its body disintegrated into nothingness. James exhaled sharply. Okay, that was cool. Alara smirked. You are learning. James didn't have time to reply. More shadowborn poured through the corridors, their flickering forms distorting reality around them. They no longer moved like assassins in the dark. Now they rushed like a hive of angry hornets, determined to rip him apart. James welcomed the challenge. He moved like a warrior born for battle, dodging attacks before they even happened. His plasma pistol fired, but now it wasn't just energy blasts. His very will guided the shots, turning them into spears of golden light. One shadowborn leaked from the ceiling, its clawed limbs reaching down. James ducked and threw a fist upward, releasing a burst of energy so powerful that it sent the creature crashing into the ceiling before vanishing into dust. Alara fought beside him, moving with impossible grace. Where James' attacks were brute force, hers were precise, elegant, deadly. She wielded her golden energy like a blade, slicing through the enemies like they were nothing more than smoke. But the shadowborn didn't stop. If anything, they grew stronger. James gritted his teeth as another shockwave blasted through the ship. Ishisho, status report. The eye's voice crackled through the chaos. Shields at 20%. Hull integrity compromised. We are losing power. James cursed. How many shadowborn are left? Too many. James turned to Alara. We need a plan. Fast. Alara's golden eyes flickered with intensity. There is only one option left. James didn't like her tone. I already hate this plan. Alara ignored him and pressed a glowing hand against the floor. The entire ship trembled, and suddenly, a holographic map of the starbound appeared. James' eyes widened. What the hell is this? Alara's voice was calm, steady. The bond has linked me to the ship's systems. I can see the entire vessel. James stared at the glowing map. The shadowborn's movements were marked like pulsing red lights, spreading through the corridors like an infection. They were coming for the control room. Fast. James exhaled. Tell me you have a way to stop them. Alara met his gaze. The ship's core. James froze. You want to blow up my ship? Alara shook her head. Not destroy. Overload. James wasn't sure that sounded any better. And what happens if we overload the core? Alara's gaze darkened. A pulse strong enough to disrupt the shadowborn's existence. James' mind raced. And us. Alara hesitated. If we do it correctly, we survive. If we don't. She didn't answer. James groaned. Oh, that's just fantastic. But before he could argue further, the shadowborn breached the control room doors. James barely had time to react before a massive force slammed into him, sending him crashing into a console. Darkness flickered at the edges of his vision, his breath knocked from his lungs. When he looked up, a new shadowborn stood before him, larger, darker, and far more terrifying than the others. Its eyes weren't just red. They were black voids, swirling with an abyss that seemed to consume reality itself. Alara stiffened beside him. James groaned. I'm gonna take a wild guess and say this guy's important. Alara's voice was laced with fear. He is the Harbinger. James wiped blood from his lip. Of course he has a creepy name. The Harbinger's deep, guttural voice echoed through the room. You are an anomaly, human. You should not exist. James smirked, despite the pain. Yeah, I get that a lot. The Harbinger lunged, its form shifting like a living nightmare. James barely had time to react before claws slashed toward his chest. But then, something unexpected happened. James didn't dodge. Instead, His body moved on its own, his instincts no longer just human. He caught the Harbinger's arm, and the moment he did, golden energy exploded between them. The Shadowborn screeched, recoiling as if burned. James' eyes widened. Holy crap. Did I just? Alara's voice was filled with realization. The bond, it is evolving. James didn't have time to process that because the Harbinger wasn't done. The monstrous being recovered instantly, its form flickering, warping, shifting into something even worse. James gritted his teeth. Okay, overloading the core sounds like a great idea now. Alara moved instantly, slamming her palm against the ship's control panel. ECHO, begin energy redirection to the core. ECHO's voice crackled. Warning, this will cause catastrophic feedback. James fired a blast at the Harbinger, barely slowing it down. Yeah, just do it. The starbound trembled as power surged through the ship, golden circuits lighting up as the overload sequence began. The Harbinger snarled, "You cannot stop the darkness." James grinned, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Wanna bet? The ship's core pulsed. Energy built. And then, everything exploded into blinding light. The final trial. A blinding golden explosion erupted from the starbound's core, swallowing everything in a radiant storm of energy. The ship trembled under the raw power surging through its circuits, the very fabric of reality bending as the overload reached its peak. James Carter felt weightless, his body no longer bound by physical limits. His vision blurred, the bright pulse of power overwhelming his senses. And then, silence. For a moment, there was nothing but a vast, endless void. No ship, no sound, no war. Just him. But he wasn't alone. Alara stood beside him, her form glowing brighter than ever before. The golden energy of the bond wrapped around them like a living force, pulsing with life. And ahead of them, in the swirling abyss of light and darkness, the Harbinger remained, unscathed. The monstrous Shadowborn no longer flickered between dimensions. It had taken full form now, towering, solid, real. Its body was wreathed in tendrils of pure darkness, swirling like a storm trapped in humanoid form. James' heart pounded. Oh, come on. How do you even survive that? The Harbinger's deep, inhuman voice rumbled like an earthquake. You cannot destroy the void, human. It is eternal. It is the end of all things. James gritted his teeth. Yeah. Well, I don't plan on letting you end me today. The Harbinger lunged, moving faster than thought. James barely had time to react, but the bond did. The golden energy surged through him, and suddenly, he was faster, stronger, more than just human. He twisted to the side, dodging the Harbinger's deadly claws by a fraction of a second. The very air around the creature seemed to warp, distorting space itself. Alara moved at his side, her own golden energy pulsing in sync with his. They fought as one. James swung his arm, and a wave of golden force erupted from his hand, colliding with the Harbinger. The creature reeled back, snarling as the energy burned its form. But it wasn't enough. The darkness pushed back. The Harbinger raised a clawed hand, and black tendrils shot forward, wrapping around James like chains. Pain. Pure, raw pain. The darkness drained him, trying to consume the bond. James gasped, his vision flashing between reality and the abyss. He felt his very soul being pulled away. But then, a familiar warmth surged inside him. Alara's voice cut through the pain. Fight it. Her hand gripped his, and suddenly, the bond flared brighter than ever before. Golden light erupted from within him, and in that instant, James saw everything. The truth of the bond. In a split-second eternity, visions flooded his mind. He saw the Celestial Empire, a golden age of power and peace. He saw Alara's ancestors, their souls bound together through time itself. And then, he saw himself, not just as a human, but as something more. The bond had chosen him. He was never meant to simply be a rescuer. He was meant to be a part of something greater. Alara's voice echoed in his mind. The bond was never about tradition, James. It was about survival. About awakening a lost power. James' breath caught in his throat. He wasn't just bonded to Alara. He was becoming something new. The realization hit him like a nova. And as the golden energy within him roared to life, he stopped fighting against the bond. And embraced it. The newborn power. James tore free from the Harbinger's grasp, golden flames blazing from his body like a supernova. His eyes burned like twin suns, his very presence radiating power. The Harbinger hesitated. For the first time, it feared him. James smirked. Not so eternal now, are you? He raised his hands, and the golden energy coalesced, forming a blade of pure light in one hand and a burning gauntlet of energy in the other. Alara stood beside him, her own energy now fully synchronized with his. They were no longer separate entities. They were one force. The Harbinger roared, lunging forward in a final desperate attack. But this time, James didn't dodge. He met the attack head-on. Their forces collided, golden light and abyssal darkness crashing against each other like two opposing gods. The air cracked, space itself warped, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. And then, James struck. With a single perfect slash of his golden blade, the Harbinger screamed. Its form shattered, breaking apart like a dying star. The darkness writhed, twisted, and then it was gone. The battle was over. James collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, his body still humming with immense power. Alara knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. It is done. James chuckled, despite the exhaustion. Yeah, tell that to my ribs. She smiled softly. You are no longer just human, James Carter. You are something different now. James exhaled, staring at his hands. The golden glow was fading, but he could still feel it inside him. A connection, a power that wasn't going away. The bond was permanent, and so was his place in this new world. He wasn't just an explorer anymore. He was a warrior of the lost celestial empire, a king without a throne. And the stars had just become his new battlefield. The rise of the new empire. Silence. For the first time since the chaos had begun, the starbound drifted in the void, free from the nightmare that had nearly consumed it. James Carter lay on the cold metal floor, his breathing heavy, his body still thrumming with the last remnants of golden energy. His fingers twitched, his muscles ached, but deep within him, something new had awakened. Something ancient. Something powerful. He wasn't the same man who had crash-landed on that battlefield and found Alara. Now he was bound to her, to the bloodline of a lost empire. The golden energy that surged through him wasn't just an accident. It was a call to something greater, and that terrified him. Alara stood beside him, her silver hair flowing like strands of light, her golden eyes fixed on him with an unreadable expression. She sensed it too, the change, the transformation. You feel it now, don't you? She asked softly. James exhaled, staring at his hand. The golden glow had faded, but he could still feel it beneath his skin, like an ember waiting to ignite. Yeah, he admitted. I do. Alara knelt beside him, placing a hand on his chest. The warmth of the bond surged between them again, not as overwhelming as before, but still there, a permanent connection, unbreakable. The Harbinger feared you, she said, because you are no longer just human. You are something more. James chuckled, though it lacked humor. Great. And what does that mean? That I'm some kind of space demigod now? Alara smiled faintly. No. It means you are the last heir to a forgotten throne. James' amusement faded. Wait. What? Alara's expression turned serious. You don't understand yet, James. The bond was not just a marriage ritual. It was a rite of succession. James froze. Succession. Alara nodded. In the days of the Celestial Empire, the royal bloodline was tied to the power of the bond. Only those who completed it could inherit the throne. Only those who carried the energy of the first light could lead. James sat up quickly, his head spinning. Wait. Are you saying I just accidentally became some kind of alien emperor? Alara's gaze didn't waver. Not accidentally. You were chosen. James groaned, rubbing his temples. I didn't sign up for this, Alara. Perhaps not, she said. But fate has a way of finding those who run from it. James shook his head. Okay, let's assume for a second that I accept this crazy idea. The Celestial Empire is gone, right? Destroyed. So what the hell am I supposed to be emperor of? Alara stood and turned to the Starbound's main viewport. Outside, space stretched endlessly, the remnants of the battle drifting like ghostly debris. Not everything was lost, she said. She raised her hand, and suddenly, the stars shifted. A new set of coordinates appeared on the ship's console, a location buried deep in the vast unknown. James narrowed his eyes. What is that? Alara turned to face him. The last refuge of my people. The last stronghold. Hours later, after repairing the Starbound systems and setting the course, they arrived. The ship emerged from hyperspace, and before them, hidden within the shadows of a dying star, lay something James never expected to see. A colossal structure, larger than anything human built. An orbital fortress, ancient yet still pulsing with life. The remnants of the Celestial Empire. James stared, his throat dry. This place, it survived. Alara nodded. Few know of its existence. It has been dormant for centuries, waiting for its true ruler to return. James scoffed. Well, too bad for them. I'm not exactly emperor material. Alara smiled. You may not have a choice. As the Starbound approached, the ancient fortress came alive. Lights flickered across its surface, deep mechanical sounds groaning through the void. Then, a transmission came through. A voice, old and weary, yet filled with unmistakable reverence. The bond has been completed. The bloodline endures. The lost king has returned. James tensed. I really don't like the sound of that. Before he could argue, the ship was pulled into the station's docking bay by an unseen force. As the landing gears locked into place, James turned to Alara, his pulse hammering. This is insane. Alara simply stepped toward the airlock, looking back at him with a knowing smile. Come, James Carter. It is time to meet your people. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, this is definitely the weirdest day of my life. The airlock hissed open, and James Carter stepped forward, not as an explorer, not as a rescuer, but as something far greater. As the last heir of a lost empire. The rise of a new era. The fortress was alive with activity. As James and Alara stepped inside, figures emerged, warriors, scholars, survivors of a forgotten age. They knelt as he passed. They knew. They felt the bond. They saw the golden energy radiating from him, the mark of the first light. James shifted uncomfortably. All right, seriously. Somebody needs to explain to me what the hell I'm supposed to do now. An elderly figure stepped forward, their face marked with the symbols of the old empire. You must lead. James shook his head. I think you have the wrong guy. The elder smiled. Do we? James turned to Alara. She didn't say anything, just watched him with quiet expectation. He exhaled. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a hero. He was just James Carter, a human who got in way over his head. But deep down, he knew one thing. The Shadowborn were still out there. The darkness wasn't gone, and if he didn't stand against it, who would? James clenched his fists. He didn't know how to rule an empire, but he knew how to fight. He looked at the warriors before him, at the last remnants of a dying civilization, and for the first time, he didn't run. He nodded. All right, let's do this. Alara smiled. Then the war for the stars begins anew. The fortress roared to life, and the lost empire rose once more.